Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers and sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals, I'm Ernie Chambers, and my mood is better than it was last week. Not that it was bad, but between the last time I was here and now, Malcolm X finally was inducted into the Nebraska Hall of Fame. So rather than do a lot of ad-libbing, I brought some items that I intend to read because I want to cover some ground relative to facts about Malcolm and things associated with him. I'm going to try not to digress or go off course. I'm going to begin right away with the article that appeared the day after he was inducted. A state commission, oh, and by the way, it was Monday that this occurred. A state commission made history Monday by choosing Omaha native and human rights activist Malcolm X to the newest member of the Nebraska Hall of Fame. Members of the Nebraska Hall of Fame Commission first voted 4-3 for him, then agreed to make the vote unanimous. Both actions were greeted by cheers and applause from a delegation of Malcolm X supporters. The group included former Omaha Senator Ernie Chambers and leaders of the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation in Omaha. Chambers called it, quote, a monumental thing for a state as backward as Nebraska, as racist as Nebraska, to have commission members be willing to add Malcolm X to the Hall of Fame. He said he felt appreciation that Malcolm X had, quote, transcended so much negativism, unquote, to finally be chosen. And the negativism was because people didn't understand him. They went by what people said, and you know you can't rely on that. But to continue, Malcolm X, who was born in Omaha in 1925 as Malcolm Little, had been nominated for the Hall of Fame at least 2 times before. 15 years ago, he was deemed too controversial for the honor. Shamika Simpson, director of tours with the Malcolm X Memorial Foundation, described herself as surprised, elated, encouraged, and happy that 30 years worth of effort had finally paid off. She said adding Malcolm X to the hall can be an opportunity for restorative justice. Less than 2 years after his birth in Omaha, Malcolm's family fled from the city because of threats from the Ku Klux Klan. Those events had lasting effects on his childhood and his life. Quote, it's an opportunity to show that Nebraska is a state that considers all men created equal, unquote, Simpson said. This was not the state accepting Malcolm X. It was 4 of the 7 people on that commission. Then the other 3 decided to jump on board to make it unanimous. This does not mean that the state of Nebraska in any way has changed. It goes to the people who voted that day to put Malcolm into the Hall of Fame. I'm not giving up on Louise Pound, said a woman who had supported Louise Pound, who was a poet, but she came over to vote for Malcolm. Malcolm X will be the first Black person in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. The 26 current members include 3 Native Americans, one of whom is a woman, 4 other women, and 19 white men. Commission Chairman Ron Hull said the next step will be to commission a bust of Malcolm X, along with raising the remaining $15,000 needed to pay for the bust. Malcolm X will be officially inducted in 2024, and the bust will join the others in the state capitol. Quote, if I am here in 2024, I will make a special visit to see Malcolm X where he should have been long ago, Chambers said. Under state law, to be included in the Hall of Fame, people must have been born in Nebraska, gained prominence while living in Nebraska, or have lived in the state and their residence in the state be an important influence on their lives and contributions, and it should have contributed to their greatness. In addition, at least 35 years must pass between a person's death and the date he or she is officially named as a member. Lawmakers added that requirement to ensure that a person's accomplishments stood the test of time. Commission guidelines spell out that inductees typically have made contributions to society in public affairs or the arts, the sciences, the professions, with the greatest weight given to, quote, activities that have added to the welfare of society and to the reputation of Nebraska, unquote. Secondary consideration is given to people involved in entertainment, athletics, or fields of endeavor where interest, publicity, and general recognition may for a time be intense, but where a contribution to society is secondary. Some things were going on in Omaha long before the date this occurred. These two little items are from May of 1969, and I'm going to let you calculate how many years there would elapse between 1969 and 2022. Letter asks Malcolm X Day, World Herald, May 16th, 1969. An open letter Thursday urged Omaha school officials to excuse from school Monday all, quote, students, teachers, counselors, and administrators, unquote, in tribute to the late Malcolm X, Black Muslim. The letter, signed by civil rights activist Ernie Chambers and Black Panther leader Eddie Bolden, said the Omaha-born Black militant, quote, became a world figure who voiced the complaints and aspirations of exploited people everywhere, unquote. Bolden previously called on Negro students to skip school May 19th in honor of Malcolm X's birthday, but the open letter, which by the way I wrote, called on all races to stay out for a day for unification, thought, and dedication. Here is the letter. And it was written May 14th, 5 days before Malcolm X's birthday, which would be May 19th. We are asking all students to remain out of school on this day to honor the memory of one of the greatest men produced in America. He was born in Omaha. Through sheer power of intellect and personality, he became a world figure who voiced the complaints and aspirations of exploited people everywhere. Malcolm X was recognized and honored by diplomats, statesmen, and heads of government in Asia, Africa, and Europe. How many other people from Nebraska in any capacity has a record like that? And Malcolm, they often talk about a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Well, Malcolm turned from a lizard into a kingly lion. He has become much better known and understood through his autobiography, which details his rise from the depths of ignorance and degradation to the position of international fame and respect. He achieved all of these things before being shot down by hired assassins. And I'll have some information about that before I'm through. Malcolm's book is used in Black studies and sociology courses in schools throughout America. Due to the clarification and elaboration of his beliefs contained in his book, in other words, him speaking for himself instead of being spoken about by others and interpreted by others, as a result of his book, he has become a patron saint to young people, teachers, and others interested in making society more humane and a better place for everyone. Malcolm X has been recognized for his thought and example of uncompromising manhood by theologians of all creeds, writers, philosophers, educators, psychiatrists, psychologists, politicians, and others. Many school systems excuse students on his birthday to honor him. We propose to recognize him also. May 19th is the day for unification, thought, and dedication. It is not designed to fragment or alienate. There must come a beginning to understanding. We suggest and recommend, therefore, that school officials excuse from school all students, regardless of race, creed, or color, who desire to be excused. This extends to teachers, counselors, and administrators. I don't know how many youngsters stayed out because of this letter, but there were quite a few, and some teachers who missed school that day. Just as Jews have their holidays, we as Black people must honor our own heroes. Since slaveholders and traders in human flesh, like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, can be officially honored in total disregard of our feelings, we have a perfect and justifiable right and duty to honor the memory of the man who did so much to erase from us the scars and degradation left by that slavery upheld by the likes of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. This, in brief, is why we are asking students of all races to remain out of school May 19th, 1969, and it's signed by Ernie Chambers and Eddie Bolden, May 14th, 1969. This article was dated May 19th, 1969. Park dubbed Malcolm X by Panthers. The leader of Omaha's Black Panthers said Sunday, he is renaming Kuntz Park Malcolm X Memorial Park in honor of the late Omaha-born Black nationalist, and that remained the name for decades. Then other generations of people came along, and I guess they were uncomfortable, but they went back to calling it Kuntz Park, and they don't even know who Kuntz was. Continuing the article, Eddie Bolden's comment drew the loudest applause from about 320 persons attending Malcolm X rally at Kuntz Park. The event was held about 13 blocks from 32nd and Pinckney Streets, where Malcolm X's followers say he was born. No, it's, excuse me. It's where he, in fact, was born. Speakers at the rally called on students to skip school today for a, quote, Black holiday, unquote, on Malcolm X's 44th birthday. Bolden urged students and adults who leave their jobs to attend a picnic starting at 1 p.m. at Kuntz Park. Eddie Bolden had said when he mentioned it, Malcolm X Park. And this shows how many years ago this was. Ernest W. Chambers. That looks strange even to me, although that's the name of my birth certificate. Ernest W. Chambers, civil rights activist, lashed the Omaha school system for its treatment of Negro students. And I didn't say Negro, I said Black. In those days, they were reluctant to print that word. Its treatment of Black students, I had said. He also berated Negroes who use drugs. He said whites are giving Negroes drugs to destroy them. Passed out were copies of the 23 demands made of the school system by Bantu, the student affiliate of the Black Panthers. And there were some of these students handing out their pamphlets at Tech High, and they were arrested. That was not anything that violated the law. So what I did the next day was took some of the same pamphlets downtown, waited outside. I did things out in the open, and I would do it alone because it's what I believe and what my conscience demanded of me. Had some of these pamphlets, and when the safety director, who was hit above the chief of police, and the mayor came out, I offered them pamphlets, and the safety director was law enforcement official. I said, arrest me. students were arrested for this, arrest me. And they naturally and obviously refused, and the students were let loose. We have to learn how to stand up for ourselves and our children. And the best thing to do is to be an example. Now, here is something from the Washington Post that appeared February 22nd of last year. It appeared last year. Malcolm X's family reveals letter they say shows NYPD and the FBI were involved in the assassination of Malcolm. Family members of Malcolm X have revealed a letter written by a New York police officer that they say shows the NYPD and the FBI were behind the 1965 assassination of the famed Black leader. The 2011 letter by the now dead officer Raymond A. Wood stated that Wood had been compelled by his supervisors at the New York Police Department to coax two members of Malcolm X's security team. They wanted to get rid of his security, and this is how the police did it. This is how they do things. Coax two members of Malcolm X's security team into committing crimes, leading to their arrests just a few days before the assassination. They were then unable to secure the entry to the New York Audubon Ballroom where Malcolm X had been speaking when he was killed. People always wondered where his security was. Malcolm X didn't fear being killed. Quote, "I live like a man who is dead," was a caption in this article. Wood maintained that the arrests were part of a conspiracy by the NYPD and the FBI to murder Malcolm X, who had become disenchanted with the Nation of Islam and left the Black separatist group to start his own organization, the Muslim Mosque. Quote, "I was a Black New York undercover police officer between May of 1964 through May of 1971, unquote," Wood's letter began. Quote, "I participated in actions that in hindsight were deplorable and detrimental to my own Black people. Under the direction of my handlers, I was told to encourage Black leaders and members of the civil rights groups to commit felonious acts," unquote. Wood said he was hired by the NYPD to infiltrate the civil rights groups, quote, "to find evidence of criminal activity so the FBI could discredit and arrest its leaders," unquote. Wood said that he threatened to resign, but that his supervisor said if he did, they would charge him with false crimes. His supervisors, Wood said, concocted an alleged plot to bomb the Statue of Liberty and implicated the members of Malcolm X's security detail, and it led to their arrests. All of the security now you see was arrested, and how and why. On the day of the assassination, Wood said, his supervisors ordered him to be at the Audubon Ballroom, where he was identified by witnesses while leaving the scene. Khalil Islam, also known as Thomas Johnson, quote, "was later arrested and wrongfully convicted to protect my cover and the secrets of the FBI and NYPD," Woods wrote. The letter was presented at a news conference Saturday in New York by Malcolm X's three daughters and civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Remember, this article that I'm reading from appeared in February of last year. A cousin of Wood, Reggie Wood, joined him in revealing the letter's contents at the Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz Memorial and Educational Center on the site where the Audubon Ballroom once stood. Raymond Wood, the cousin of the writer who had written the letter, shortly after being diagnosed, Raymond Wood wrote the letter. Shortly after being diagnosed with stomach cancer, had stipulated to his cousin that he did not want his involvement to be made public until after his death. His cancer went into remission in 2012, and he did not die until November 24th, 2020. That's why the letter was so late in coming out. Sunday marked the 56th anniversary of the assassination. At her daily briefing Monday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was asked about the revelation in the letter. Quote, "I have not seen the letter," she said. "If you want to provide it to us, I'm happy to have the right person look into it after the briefing." This was in 2021. Therefore, Biden was in office at the time, and it was Biden's press secretary who was speaking. Reggie Wood speaks at the news conference alongside Malcolm X's daughters Saturday in New York. That was the subcaption. What happened after a boxer, a revolutionary, a singer, and a football star met in 1960s hotel room? Those were some of the people who met to talk to Muhammad Ali about his connection to Malcolm X and the Muslims. Early last year, we're up to now, the present again. Early last year, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance announced that his office would review the convictions of the two Nation of Islam members who were held responsible in Malcolm X's killing. One of the men who confessed to the killing, Mujahid Abdul Halim, aka Talmadge Hayer or Thomas Hagen, has maintained since his 1966 trial that the other two Nation members, Islam and Muhammad Aziz, aka Norman Butler, were innocent. Now, this man had confessed to being one of the shooters, and he exonerated the other two. But the police wanted those others held. Halim served 45 years in prison before he was paroled in 2010. Islam, paroled in 1987, died in 2009. Aziz, 83, was paroled in 1985. The Innocence Project, along with attorney David B. Shaney's, are fighting to clear Islam's and Aziz's names. A 2020 documentary series on Netflix, Who Killed Malcolm X, and efforts by the Innocence Project prompted Vance to review whether to reopen the case. After Saturday's news conference, Vance's office released a statement saying its review of this matter is active and ongoing. In a separate statement, the NYPD said it, quote, has provided all available records relevant to the case to the district attorney. The department remains committed to assist with that review in any way. The FBI, as usual, has declined to comment. The assassination of Malcolm X has long been a subject of fascination to historians and activists, given the acrimony between Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X after his break from the group. According to witnesses in the Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965, a man rushed forward and shot Malcolm once in the chest with a sawed-off shotgun, as two other men also charged the stage firing semi-automatic handguns. Malcolm X was pronounced dead that afternoon, shortly after arriving at a hospital. Malcolm X's widow, Betty Shabazz, said she believed current Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, a protege of Malcolm X, was involved in her husband's assassination. In the December 4th, 1964 issue of Muhammad Speaks, the organization's newspaper, Farrakhan wrote, quote, "The die is set and Malcolm shall not escape. Such a man is worthy of death," unquote. Farrakhan later acknowledged that his remarks played a role in the assassination. After confessing at length to his cousin, Raymond Wood wrote the letter, believing he would die soon. Reggie Wood said at the news conference that on the advice of Crump, he planned to publish a short memoir of his cousin's confession, which covered other matters as well. Quote, "I am aging and in failing health. Recently, I learned about the death of Thomas Johnson and am deeply concerned that with my death, his family will not be able to exonerate him," Raymond Wood wrote in the 2011 letter. "It is my hope that this information is received with the understanding that I have carried these secrets with a heavy heart and remorsefully regret my participation in this letter. But since his cancer went into remission, the letter was not released way back then, but only after he died. Lawyer Crump called on Vance's office to launch a full reinvestigation of Malcolm's assassination. Quote, who more personified the Black liberation movement in America in 1965 than civil rights icon Malcolm X, Crump said at the news conference. The FBI, quote, was trying to stop another Black messiah from uniting African Americans. This was orchestrated, and the only way we get to justice, restorative justice or otherwise, is with the truth. This article was dated November 18th of last year, 2021. Pair convicted in killing of Malcolm X to be cleared. Two of the three men convicted in the assassination of Malcolm X are set to be cleared Thursday after insisting on their innocence since the 1965 killing of one of the United States' most formidable fighters for civil rights. Their lawyers and Manhattan's top prosecutor both said this Wednesday. A nearly 2-year-long reinvestigation found that authorities withheld evidence favorable to the defense in the trial of Muhammad Aziz, now 83, and the late Khalil Islam, said their attorneys, the Innocence Project and civil rights lawyer David Shaney's. Quote, the assassination of Malcolm X was a historical event that demanded a scrupulous investigation and prosecution, but instead produced one of the most blatant miscarriages of justice that I have ever seen, unquote, Innocence Project co-founder Barry Scheck said in a statement. That was just last year in November. District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. later tweeted that his office would join the men's attorneys in asking the judge Thursday to toss out the convictions. He's the district attorney in New York, Cyrus Vance Jr. Quote, these men did not get the justice that they deserved, Vance told the New York Times, which first reported on the developments. One of the civil rights era's most controversial and compelling figures, Omaha native. See, Omaha got recognition because of Malcolm X. Malcolm was known better than Omaha. Malcolm was the most famous person ever born in Omaha. And I stated to the media, which they didn't put in the interview they took with me, that there could not be a Hall of Fame in Nebraska, which did not include the most famous person, Malcolm X, I was referring to, who had ever been born in Omaha. And the only thing that people knew in other countries about Omaha and Nebraska was that Malcolm X was born here. Omaha native Malcolm X rose to fame as the Nation of Islam's chief spokesperson, proclaiming the Black Muslim organization's message at the time, racial separation as a road to self-actualization. He famously urged Black people to claim civil rights by any means necessary and referred to white people as blue-eyed devils, and he later denounced racism. I say that he defamed the devil when he did that. The devil never held Black people in slavery. The devil never sold Black people, never raped Black women, Black girls, and Black children. But this is what white people did. So in reality, Malcolm, but I understand it, defamed the devil when he referred to white people as blue-eyed devils. Continuing this article. About a year before his death, Malcolm split from the Nation of Islam and later made a pilgrimage to Mecca, returning with a new view of the potential for racial unity. Some in the Nation of Islam saw him as a traitor. At age 39, he was gunned down as he began a speech in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom on February 21st, 1965. Aziz Islam and a third Muslim, Mujahid Abdul Halim, also known as Talmadge Hayer and Thomas Hagan, were convicted of murder in March 1966 and sentenced to life in prison. Hagan said he was one of 3 gunmen who shot Malcolm X, but he testified that neither Aziz nor Islam was involved. The two, then known as Norman 3X Butler and Thomas 15X Johnson, maintained throughout that they were innocent and offered alibis at their 1966 trial. No physical evidence linked them to the crime. Hagan was paroled in 2010. He identified the two other men who were the gunmen, and Hagan admitted, but no one else was ever arrested. There was no interest in getting those who killed Malcolm. They were heroes to the police and the FBI and other white people. According to the New York Times, the reinvestigation found that the FBI had documents that pointed to other suspects, and a still living witness supported Aziz's alibi that he was at home with a leg injury at the time of the shooting. Also, the review found that prosecutors knew about but did not disclose that undercover officers were in the ballroom when the gunfire erupted, and police knew that someone had called the Daily News of New York earlier that day saying that Malcolm X would be killed. Aziz was released in 1985. Islam was released 2 years later and died in 2009. Both continued to press to clear their names. By these law enforcement officers being in the place and knowing this, if they were going to do the job they were sworn to uphold to do, they would have prevented this. But they were there to see that it was carried out on schedule. This is why I said the police are our ISIS. We as Black people have nothing to fear from ISIS, but look what the police have done to us down through the centuries. This article is dated November 21st of last year. Decades of Doubt, a timeline in the Malcolm X investigation. 2 men are cleared in the death of the civil rights icon. The Associated Press, Dateline, New York. More than a century after the assassination of Omaha-born Malcolm X, 2 of the men convicted of killing him were exonerated after decades of doubt about who was responsible for the civil rights icon's murder. Manhattan judge Ellen Beeben dismissed the convictions of Muhammad Aziz and the late Khalil Islam after prosecutors and the men's lawyers said a renewed investigation found new evidence that undermined the case against the men and determined that authorities withheld some of what they knew. Quote, the event that has brought us to court today should never have occurred, unquote, Aziz told the court. I am an 83-year-old man who is victimized by the criminal justice system, unquote. He and Islam, who maintained their innocence from the start in the 1965 killing at Manhattan's Audubon Ballroom, were paroled in the 1980s. Islam died in 2009. Malcolm X gained national prominence as the voice of the Nation of Islam, exhorting Black people to claim their civil rights by any means necessary. Near the end of Malcolm X's life, he split with the Black Muslim organization, and after a trip to Mecca, started speaking about the potential for racial unity. It earned him the ire of some in the Nation of Islam who saw him as a traitor. He was shot to death February 21st, 1965. He was 39. A timeline of key dates. March 9th, 1964. Once a leading spokesman for Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam, Malcolm X announced that he is breaking with Muhammad's Black Muslim group and organizing his own organization. February 14th of 1965, the following year, a firebomb tossed through a window explodes in Malcolm X's living room in Queens hours before gunmen killed Malcolm X. Hours before dawn. Malcolm flees the burning house with his wife and 4 children. The next day, February 17th, which would be 3 days after the firebomb. And some of the journalists of the day said Malcolm orchestrated the firebombing of his own home while he and his children and his wife were in it. 3 days after that, 3 gunmen on February 21st killed Malcolm X as he begins a speech at the Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan. He is 39. Muhammad Abdul and the men that I mentioned before were arrested at the scene, and Hagen was shot in the leg by a bodyguard. February 26th, 5 days later, Muhammad Aziz, 26, then known as Norman 3X Butler, is arrested in the assassination. March 3rd, 1965, the following month, Khalil Islam, 30, then known as Thomas 15X Johnson, is arrested in the killing. Both he and Aziz insist they are innocent and they offered alibis. February 28th of the following year, Halim admits during the trial that he took part in the killing, but insists that his 2 co-defendants were not involved. March, following month, Halim, Islam, and Aziz are convicted of murder. April, the following month, all 3 defendants are sentenced to life in prison. December 6th of 1977, 11 years later, Halim files an affidavit stating that his 2 co-defendants are innocent, naming 4 other co-conspirators. June of 1985, Aziz is released on parole. 1987, 2 years later, Islam is released on parole. November of 1992, 7 years later, Halim's request for early release from a New York prison is turned down. March of 1998, which was 6 years later, Aziz is appointed to help run the Harlem Mosque where Malcolm X once preached. August of 2009, Khalil Islam dies 22 years after his release from prison. March 2010, the state of New York grants Halim's parole on his 17th try. April of 2010, Halim is freed. 1 day later, historian Manning Marable publishes Malcolm X, A Life of Reinvention, a biography that concludes Aziz, and Islam are innocent, and brings new attention to claims that some of the actual killers were still at large. It wins a Pulitzer Prize. February 2020, Netflix begins streaming episodes of Who Killed Malcolm X. The 6-part documentary examines the assassination and evidence that members of Halim's Nation of Islam Mosque in Newark, New Jersey, were behind the killing. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office says it will consider reopening the investigation. Excuse me. November of 2021, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance Jr. announces that his office will ask a court to exonerate Islam and Aziz. Lawyers for the men say a nearly 2-year-long investigation found that authorities withheld evidence favorable to the defendants during the trial. November 18th of last year, NYPD Chief of Patrol Juanita Holmes said she felt for Malcolm X's family and for Aziz and Islam if we are responsible for withholding information. Quote, I hope this doesn't end this discussion, NYC Mayor Bill de Blasio said. For millions and millions of Americans, we still need to know who killed Malcolm X and who ordered it. I have something here, speaking of Hall of Fame. Chambers headed for Hall of Fame, and this was from April 22nd, 2005. Term limits, the right printing is very small. This was from an editorial in the Lincoln Journal-Star, as I say, April 22nd, 2005, just when I was going to be term limited the first time after 38 years. Term limits may force Senator Ernie Chambers out of the legislature in 3 years, but they might as well reserve a space for him in the state capitol. After a few decades, he'll be back in the Nebraska Hall of Fame. That might be difficult to believe right now, with insults and wounds inflicted by the legendary senator from Omaha still fresh in the minds of his opponents. But when Chambers is eligible for consideration 35 years after his death, when that occurs, there'll be great cheering throughout the state. 35 years after his death, there are sure to be supporters to propose that a bronze sculpture of his bearded visage join those already in this august company. This week, the self-styled defender of the downtrodden, the only Black member of the legislature, set a new record for longevity when he broke the previous record set by Jerome Warner of Waverly. If Chambers serves out his term, he will have been in the legislature for 38 years. As long as term limits are in effect, that record will never be broken. I went back after 4 years sitting out and served 8 more for a total of 46 years. The accomplishments that Chambers values are successes such as elimination of the death penalty for juveniles and people with mental retardation, getting rid of corporal punishment in schools, and passage of the first state legislative resolution calling for divestiture of U.S. investments in South Africa as a protest against its apartheid government. During his decades in office, Chambers served only one brief stint as a committee chairman. But few state senators have wielded as much clout with an memorable rhetoric and an incomparable mastery of rules. Chambers flouts attempts to curb his power. Quote, Senator Chambers seldom plays a losing hand, unquote, said lobbyist Walt Radcliffe. Quote, most members now do regard him as the dean of the legislature and look to him for advice, unquote, said Senator Diana Shimmick of Lincoln. His influence extends far outside the legislative chamber. When he heard about the antics of a rogue judge in Omaha, Chambers conducted his own investigation, filed a judicial ethics complaint. The judge, who was accused of assaulting another judge, signing court papers with names like Adolf Hitler and Snow White, setting bond amounts like a gazillion pingos, and lighting firecrackers in another judge's office, eventually was removed from office by the Nebraska Supreme Court pursuant to my complaint. American idealism teaches that in this land of democratic opportunity, everyone has a chance to seize the reins of authority, and I add this, even over the opposition of all the white people who claim to be in favor of fair play to everybody. Senator Ernie Chambers, still treading the corridors of power after more than 3 decades, provides living proof in his individualistic, iconoclastic way that the dream is not illusion. That's a considerable accomplishment that even his enemies should recognize. And speaking of a bust, a Lincoln artist, sculptor, did this, not for the Hall of Fame. And when he created a statue, an actual bust, and this was told to me by a lawyer who bid on it, it was the highest bid was given by the wife of a white guy who owns a trucking company. Naturally, she's white too. He stopped bidding because the price was too high, but he did hire that artist, that sculptor, to produce one of these busts for him. Now, I, the subject of it, have never seen it, but isn't that the way life goes? As said the canary, when informed that the door of the cage was ajar, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching the Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.